I had just handed in my last assignment for the semester. My brain felt like a dried-up sponge, and my academic responsibilities were, for the most part, done. All except one, the one that truly gnawed at me. For weeks I'd been trying and failing to land a decent summer job. Every application, every interview, just led to another sterile rejection email. This persistent failure cast a long gray shadow over what should have been a liberating afternoon. As I made my way off campus, heading towards my cramped, perpetually untidy apartment, my eyes drifted towards the imposing structure that perpetually loomed in the distance. The old Blackwood Asylum. It had been abandoned for decades, a hulking Gothic silhouette against the setting sun, somehow always looking out of place amidst the modern university buildings and bustling student housing. Its crumbling facade, overgrown with thick ivy, whispered silent tales of forgotten suffering and despair. But it wasn't just its desolate, decaying appearance that seemed strange. The main gate, a rusted iron monstrosity, was always padlocked, yet a faint, almost imperceptible hum seemed to emanate from somewhere deep within its decaying silent walls. The fence surrounding this sprawling, forgotten complex looked to be around 10 or 11 feet tall, topped with menacing barbed wire that glinted sharply in the fading light. It was no joke. Whoever had erected it clearly intended for it to be more than a simple boundary. This fence was built to keep things in, or perhaps to keep the curious out. It was on this towering barrier that I suddenly noticed something new. A sign freshly printed and stark against the weathered metal. I was still across the street, but the bold, almost comically large "Help Wanted" night security sign was impossible to miss. I had never seen any sign posted on this fence, let alone one that suggested life or potential work existed within the asylum's forbidden walls. My curiosity, despite the creeping unease that began to settle in my stomach, was instantly piqued. Crossing the street, a knot of apprehension tightened sharply in my stomach. As I approached the gate, I read the smaller print beneath the main heading. Inquire at the guard's cabin inside the grounds. Peering intently through the rusty bars, I could just make out the faint flickering glow of a light within a small dilapidated wooden cabin nestled near the main entrance. Hesitation warred with desperation. $2,000 for one night's work. It seemed too good to be true. And yet, what did I truly have to lose? Without much further thought, spurred by the mounting pressure of summer expenses, I pushed on the creaky, unexpectedly unlocked pedestrian gate to the side and stepped inside the hallowed grounds. The man who emerged from the cabin, almost as if he'd sensed my arrival, was surprisingly spry for his age. His hair was a shock of pure, untamed white, but his movements were fluid, his eyes sharp and intensely observant. He wore a crisp, dark suit that seemed strikingly out of place in such a desolate setting. "How may I help you today?" he asked, his voice a gravelly murmur that nonetheless carried a certain unsettling warmth. "I just saw the sign out on the fence," I began, my voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. "Is it for a job or something?" He nodded slowly, a faint, knowing smile playing on his thin lips. "Of sorts," he responded, his gaze lingering on me for a disconcerting moment. I stood in profound silence, waiting for him to elaborate, for him to explain the absurdity of a help-wanted sign at an abandoned asylum. He seemed to read my thoughts. "Why don't we take a walk?" he suggested, gesturing down the cracked, overgrown path that led deeper into the asylum grounds. I followed, my movements stiff and uncertain, the oppressive quiet amplifying the crunch of our footsteps on scattered debris and brittle dead leaves. "I don't intend to waste your time," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, yet resonating with profound authority. "This institution has been here for a very long time, longer than you might guess. Many custodians have watched over it. This has been my specific role for more than 40 years, and I don't intend for that to change anytime soon." He paused, his gaze drifting over the decaying buildings that loomed around us like spectral giants. However, some, what you might call, extenuating circumstances have dictated that I leave my post for a few days to attend to another private matter, and those whom I might regularly call on in these specific situations are unfortunately unavailable. He turned suddenly to face me, his eyes piercing through my own. The job I'm offering is simple. Act as its keeper for one night, and one night only. A night that just so happens to be exactly 1 week from today. I ignored the first half of what he said. My mind latched onto the phrase, one night only. It sounded less like a job, and more like a bizarre challenge. I'm sorry, sir, but I'm looking for more of an actual stable job, and 1 day's work, it's just not enough to... He cut me off abruptly, his voice sharper now. I am offering $2,000 cash, up front, off the books entirely. My mouth hung open for a few seconds, before disbelief, doubt, and mistrust washed over me. $2,000 for a single night? It was an absurd sum. I don't think I can possibly do that. None of the university jobs would ever work like that. That would be unacceptable. He cut me off again, a distinct hint of impatience in his tone. This asylum isn't owned by the university. If it were up to them, this place would be long gone by now. They don't have a say, and thank God for that. I remained silent, unsure of what strange situation I had just stumbled into, or what was truly going on. The man Silas must have sensed my apprehension, as his expression softened. "My name is Silas," he said, extending a hand. I suppose it would have been appropriate to start with that. I told him my name, my voice a mere whisper, and reluctantly shook his hand, feeling a strange chill. He stopped walking, turned fully to me, and stared for a long, uncomfortable moment before reaching into his dark suit pocket. As I said, I would prefer not to waste any more time. He pulled out a large, heavy ring of keys, ancient and tarnished with age, and extended his hand to me once more. "The choice, young man, is entirely yours, but I need you to make it now." I slowly reached out my trembling hand and picked up the imposing set of keys. Without much conscious thought as to the true nature of what I was agreeing to, the sheer amount of money, eclipsing any lingering doubts or fears, I nodded. "Good," Silas said, his faint smile returning, a subtle, unnerving curve. "Be back here in 1 week at 7 p.m. These keys will get you into my cabin. I will leave you a letter. Read it before you start. It will tell you everything you need to know. Your money will be in the drawer next to the chair inside the cabin." Silas turned abruptly and walked away, disappearing silently into the deepening shadows of the asylum grounds, leaving me standing utterly alone in the middle of the overgrown path, looking down at the heavy, ancient set of keys in my hand. I pocketed them and headed for home, my mind reeling. Still thinking it over, I considered the stark possibilities. Worst case scenario, I show up at the asylum a week from now, get no money, and simply go back home, having lost nothing but a little time. In the best case, I walk away with $2,000 for 1 night's work, a sum that would solve many of my immediate problems. What, truly, did I have to lose? The next few days involved some celebratory drinking with my roommates, a lot of much-needed sleeping in, and then a few more days of disheartening, unsuccessful job hunting. The $2,000 from Silas felt like a sudden, unexpected lifeline, a genuine chance to actually enjoy at least some of my summer before returning to the relentless grind of everyday life and studies. On the precise day I was supposed to work my shift at the asylum, I woke up mid-afternoon with a raging headache, a souvenir from the night before. I seriously considered staying home, hanging out with my roommates for another night of casual drinking, instead of making the unsettling walk down to the asylum for what would probably end up being a scam. But then my gaze fell upon the keys Silas had given me, sitting innocently on my empty, dusty desk, glinting with a faint light in the afternoon sun. For some unknown reason, seeing them there motivated me to finally drag myself out of bed. I decided then and there that the 10-minute walk to the asylum and back was worth seeing if the job was truly real. If it was, I'd found the easiest $2,000 I had ever made in my life. Without much else pressing to do, I decided to head out early and arrived at the asylum gates around 6:30 p.m. The sun was still quite high, casting long, eerie shadows that stretched like grasping fingers across the forgotten grounds. I waited around for a few minutes, trying to spot anything suspicious. Given the bizarre circumstances, who wouldn't? I found no discernible sign of Silas or anyone else who might raise an alarm, so I decided to just go for it. I walked with purpose, my stride resolute, into the asylum grounds and directly towards the small, dilapidated cabin. I pulled out the set of keys Silas had given me, and to my surprise, the very first key I tried fit the ancient rusted lock. I had almost, in my cynicism, expected none of them to work at all. I pulled open the door slowly. The small interior appeared strikingly simple, yet surprisingly clean and meticulously organized. It was a compact, square space, dominated by a single sturdy wooden chair positioned in front of a counter and a grimy streaked window that looked out onto the asylum's desolate main courtyard. Beside it, a large dark metal cabinet with two heavy imposing doors and a formidable lock stood silently against the far wall. After taking a quick, cautious look around the seemingly innocuous room, my eyes fixed intently on the small drawer positioned directly below the counter. My heart began to pound against my ribs as I stepped inside and pulled the heavy door shut behind me, the creak echoing loudly in the sudden, oppressive silence. I fumbled through the chain of keys, trying each one on the small drawer until, with a satisfying click, one finally fit. I turned the lock and pulled the drawer open slowly to reveal a thick, brown envelope. My hands scrambled to open it and count each crisp, freshly minted $100 bill. $2,000. It added up perfectly. I counted it again, then once more. I even checked each bill for any subtle signs of forgery. They looked absolutely real. I was so concerned about the money, so fixated on its reality, that I completely failed to notice the letter that had silently fallen out of the envelope until I spotted it lying innocently on the dusty floor. After reverently stuffing the thick wad of bills into my backpack, I carefully unfolded the single sheet of paper and began to read, my heart still thrumming. To whom it may concern, though the job offered to you may seem like nothing more than a convenient opportunity to make a quick buck, the responsibility inherent in this task is far greater than you can imagine. Below, I have meticulously left a list of rules. Each is to be followed with extreme, unwavering care and attention. There are few places in this world as sensitive as Blackwood Asylum. The most important, paramount thing to remember, young keeper, is this: no one who willingly entered these hallowed grounds ever truly left Hall. Rule number 1. The main gates. This asylum has one main gate, the sole way in or out. This gate must be securely locked by 8 p.m. without fail and kept rigidly shut until sunrise. Feel free to shut it sooner, for your own peace of mind. No admittance by anyone, including but not limited to law enforcement or emergency services, is to be permitted during this period. You, as the temporary keeper of this asylum, are strictly not allowed to leave these grounds until the sun has fully risen. The largest key amongst the set you have been given is specifically for this gate. Rule number 2. The wandering echoes. As a grave consequence of its deeply unfortunate history, this asylum is frequently visited by those misguided souls who foolishly call themselves urban explorers or ghost hunters. Though the main gate should be firmly locked for the majority of your shift, if you happen to spot any such individuals entering or attempting to enter the asylum grounds, you are to remove them immediately, without hesitation. You are permitted to call on law enforcement for the expedited removal of trespassers. But be warned, law enforcement may not set foot inside of the asylum gates after 8 p.m. under any circumstances. Get any trespassers out as soon as humanly possible. God only knows what these fools would inadvertently do if they were ever to find something truly real. Rule number 3. The uniform. Another key on your chain unlocks the imposing metal cabinet directly next to you. Inside are numerous various items, one of which is a security uniform, much like my own, and a sturdy pair of boots to accompany them. You must change out of your current clothes and into this uniform for the entire remainder of your shift. I have guessed your measurements as closely as I possibly could. It may not be a perfect fit, but it will unquestionably serve its vital purpose. They must think you're one of them. You may keep the uniform once your shift is definitively over. Rule number 4, the recordings. I have carefully placed a small, old-fashioned tape recorder on a dusty table in the main common room, along with 5 pristine blank tapes. Locate them without delay. Inside the cabinet, alongside the uniform, you will notice a box of chalk. After locking the main gate, proceed directly to each of the 4 main patient wards, north, south, east, and west, and draw a large, perfect, unbroken circle with the chalk in the precise center of each ward's common area. This doesn't have to be a work of art, but the one thing you must be absolutely careful of is to leave a complete circle with no gaps whatsoever. After doing so, play the first blank tape on the recorder in the main common room and leave it recording until precisely 3 a.m. Do not, under any circumstances, listen to the recording until your shift is definitively over. Keep an extra piece of chalk with you at all times, as a precaution. Rule number 5. The whispers in the walls. Throughout the asylum, in various hallways, you may notice small, unassuming metal grates on the walls. These are ancient remnants of an old communication system, once used to monitor patients from a central observation room. These grates now serve a different, far more ominous purpose. If you hear a distinct human-like whisper emanating from one of these grates, immediately draw a chalk X over the grate and quickly move away. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt to communicate back. There is another possible, more dire situation you may face with the whispers. If multiple grates begin to whisper simultaneously, in rapid, frantic succession, stop precisely where you are and draw a large chalk circle around yourself as fast as you possibly can. Give yourself ample room, as you will not be able to leave your circle for a while. Remain absolutely still and do not be tricked, coerced, or enticed into leaving or breaking the integrity of the circle. Rule number 6. The mannequins. In each of the 4 main patient wards, you will inevitably find a life-size medical mannequin. All 4 share the same unsettling design. Blank, featureless faces, thin, spindly limbs, and a slightly hunched, unnatural posture. They sit patiently on the floor in the corner of each ward, always facing inward towards the middle of the room. If you happen to notice that one is missing, disregard it completely. If you happen to see one in a different, unexpected place, turn away or close your eyes. Do not, under any circumstances, give any indication whatsoever that you know it has moved. They are not a danger if you leave them alone. Rule number 7. Room 404. Near the southwest corner of the asylum, on the 2nd floor, sits a locked room specifically numbered 404. The only thing you truly need to know about room 404 is this: if its door is open at any point during your shift, immediately watch your back with extreme caution and do not, under any circumstances, go back to the security cabin. Inside the front pocket of your uniform jacket is a small sealed vial containing a clear, innocuous liquid. If the door to room 404 is discovered open, immediately locate the vial, open it without hesitation, and pour the entire contents onto the floor directly in front of the open doorway. Pay no attention to anything that may emerge from room 404 after you do this. You may then, and only then, safely return to the cabin. When your shift is definitively over, unlock the main gate and leave the entire set of keys in the drawer. Best wishes and good luck. Silas. I scoffed, then laughed aloud as I read, appreciating the grim humor and obvious theatrical exaggeration. As amusing as I found the sheer effort Silas had put into crafting this elaborate letter, a practical, logical part of me, the part that had just been handed 2,000 crisp dollars, decisively chose to follow every single rule, to the letter. Even if this whole terrifying ordeal was nothing more than an elaborate twisted joke, $2,000 was definitely worth it. I began by opening the imposing metal cabinet directly next to me. On the other side of the heavy door, there hung a uniform, precisely as Silas had mentioned. It looked remarkably well made and surprisingly clean, almost new. I quickly changed out of my casual clothes and into the uniform. It fit like a glove, a little snug in the shoulders perhaps, but otherwise absolutely perfect. I don't know much about uniforms, but this one was clearly high quality, much more expensive than anything I could ever afford. I looked at the list of rules once more, committing them to memory, before carefully folding the letter and stuffing it back into my pocket. Rule number 1. The main gates. I figured this would be easy enough to get out of the way. A simple, mundane task to begin my strange night. I grabbed my set of keys and headed out of the cabin towards the imposing iron gates. As I approached, I instinctively looked around, scanning the desolate landscape to see if anyone was watching. Once again, I saw no one, only the silent, decaying buildings. I tried to pull one side of the gate shut with a single hand, but it wasn't so easy. The rusted metal gate was incredibly heavy, and pulling it shut required a significant amount of force, the ancient chains creaking ominously in the deepening twilight. After physically closing both massive sides, I found the largest key and inserted it into the keyhole. As I twisted the key, I heard the satisfying, definitive noise of the lock mechanism clicking loudly into place, a heavy metallic thud that echoed powerfully in the pre-dusk silence, sealing me in. I turned away from the now locked gate, a sense of finality settling over me, and pulled out the letter again, rereading the next instruction. I figured the urban explorers shouldn't be too bad of a problem. I assumed they're a frequent, annoying problem for Silas, especially at night. Since I hadn't gotten a good, comprehensive view of the entire asylum yet, I decided to walk through the main courtyard and methodically search for anyone who might still be foolishly hiding inside. While walking, an interesting, unsettling thought occurred to me. Of the countless times I had casually passed by this asylum, I had never, not once, noticed a single visitor inside. At some point, I should have spotted at least someone exploring, or maybe some diligent historical preservationists, but I had never seen anyone. I vividly remembered what Silas had ominously written in his letter. No one who entered here willingly ever truly left whole. The thought sent a sudden cold wave of unease washing over me. What precisely did he mean by that, I wondered. After making a few cautious loops around the main courtyard and diligently checking the ground floor windows for any telltale signs of life, I felt reasonably confident there were no trespassers, so I headed back to the security cabin where I planned to mess around on my phone and maybe read a book to kill some time. It was on the quiet walk back that I happened to look down and see a small, old-fashioned tape recorder resting on a dusty table in what appeared to be the main common room. Just as the letter had mentioned, there were 5 blank tapes carefully placed beside it. I casually walked back to the cabin, grabbed a fresh box of chalk from the metal cabinet, and returned to the main common room. I then made my way to the first of the 4 wards, the North Ward. I located its common area, swept away some debris, and began drawing a large, deliberate chalk circle in the exact center. As I generously applied the chalk, I wondered if it would hold up to repeated foot traffic, but the floor in this asylum seemed surprisingly resistant to dirt and wear. Why, I mused, would Silas have me do this? I quickly dodged my own question. I was here to earn money, not to ask inconvenient questions or seek explanations for the inexplicable. After completing the first perfect circle, I moved on to locate and eventually draw identical circles in the other 3 wards, south, east, and west, making very sure that the circles had no gaps whatsoever. After all 4 were meticulously complete, I returned to the main common room. I carefully placed the first blank tape into the recorder and pressed both play and record, noting the precise time on my watch. It was 7:30 p.m., still relatively early in my long, strange shift. Reading the letter once more, it seemed I had completed everything I needed to do. The main gates were securely locked, the protective circles were meticulously drawn, and no trespassers had been found. The next several long hours went by quietly. I played around idly on my phone, texted a few friends, and read a couple of chapters in the thick escapist book I had brought with me. I consciously decided against zoning out and listening to music, not because I believed some spectral, vengeful patient was going to come after me, but because I didn't feel all that comfortable sitting utterly alone in a dark, abandoned asylum, my tiny little cabin a beacon of light in the vast, oppressive darkness. Eventually, I grew tired of simply sitting around, the quiet pressing in on me, and took a tentative step outside of the cabin to get some fresh, albeit cold air. There was a cool night breeze that carried the faint, unsettling scent of damp earth and decay. The only sound to be heard was the soft, rhythmic chirping of crickets, a deceptively peaceful chorus. I leaned back against the cabin wall, taking a long, slow sip of my energy drink, when a sharp, piercing, almost guttural whisper suddenly broke the calm silence, and a jolt of terror shot through me. I instinctively dropped the can onto the cold pavement with a metallic clatter. The unsettling sound came from a short distance away, from somewhere deep within the main hallway, but I couldn't pinpoint its exact source in the profound darkness. I frantically retrieved my flashlight from the cabin, my hands shaking, and made my way cautiously over to the source of the noise, my heart pounding in my chest. Searching the crumbling wall, my flashlight beam finally illuminated a small rusted metal grate, about 5 feet off the ground. I stood in confusion for a moment, my breath hitched as I stared intently at the grate, the faint, distorted whispers continuing, sounding increasingly inhuman. I snapped out of my trance and sternly told myself this had to be a hoax from Silas, trying to scare me. But whatever was causing the whispers, I felt goosebumps begin to rise on my arms, and paranoia began to set in. I practically ran back to the cabin, desperate for another piece of chalk. I quickly returned to the grate, and, with trembling hands, drew a large chalk X over it. The instant the X was complete, a sudden, unnerving silence fell. The whispers stopped, abruptly. I took a deep, shaky step back, and caught my breath, before reassessing the newfound severity of the situation. It wasn't that bad, I told myself, and I felt, perhaps foolishly, like I still had a tenuous handle on things. I turned away from the grate, my nerves still frayed, and took not more than 3 tentative steps before another whisper began, this one from directly behind me, closer and far more guttural. I jumped, startled, as another whisper joined it from further down the hallway, this one even more rapid and panicked. I didn't have time to process the terror before yet another joined in, from an adjacent room. Then again, on the opposite side, the sounds multiplying. Only seconds had passed before there were 5, then 6, then 7 distinct, terrifying whispers. The combined cacophony of whispers, culminating in a deafening, disembodied chorus, seemed to synchronize. Though Silas's rules never explicitly stated it, I could instinctively feel that these whispers weren't a direct danger to me. They were warnings, warnings of something vast, ancient, and terrifying that was swiftly on its way. I quickly tore open another piece of chalk, and with frantic haste began to draw a circle around myself, trying to give myself a good 8 or 9 feet of space. But before I could even finish it, the chalk snapped abruptly in my hand. I rushed to spread out the chalk I had already poured, brushing the ground furiously like my very life depended on it, trying to complete the circle. After 30 agonizing seconds that stretched into an eternity, I finally completed my circle, drawing the last, desperate line. I leaned back, falling heavily to the ground, trying to catch my ragged breath, when suddenly every single whisper stopped. The entire asylum went eerily silent. Not even the soft chirps of the crickets remained. I held my breath, afraid to make a sound. My eyes darted around frantically, searching desperately for any sign of something. I felt intensely like I was being watched, but I couldn't see or hear a thing. Eventually, my eyes, wide with terror, fell on the corner of the north ward, the one closest to my precarious position. My heart skipped a beat as I noticed that the familiar medical mannequin was no longer there. I slowly stood back up and shifted my gaze from one ward to the next. All four of them were gone, vanished. I didn't have time to process this terrifying revelation before a loud, wet thud echoed through the silent air, capturing my attention, followed by a faint, unsettling dragging sound. I shined my flashlight down the main hallway, its beam trembling. Behind a collapsed gurney, partially obscured by shadows, I could distinctly see something large being dragged laboriously across the floor. My first desperate instinct was that some sort of large animal had somehow made its way into the asylum. That idea was instantly shattered when a large grotesque mass emerged from behind the gurney. The viscous black liquid that oozed and dripped from around it was the only thing I could clearly see from my confined position, and I dared not leave the protective confines of my chalk circle. Everything remained silent for a minute or two, an eternity of agonizing waiting, before I heard a sharp, sickening crack, like breaking bones, emanating from behind the gurney. And then a horrifying figure finally emerged, a cadaverous, impossibly emaciated figure, its skin stretched taut and translucent over bony, sharp protrusions, was limping its way slowly in my direction with a series of jerky, unnatural movements. When I say limping, you might instinctively imagine it moved like a slow, frail old man. No, this thing, this grotesque entity, somehow made it through the entire main hallway of the asylum at a terrifying sprinting pace, its skeletal joints popping audibly with each sickening stride. As it rapidly approached, my trembling flashlight beam fully illuminated the monstrosity. Blackened pieces of what looked disturbingly like decaying tissue were haphazardly attached to ashen-colored bones, a patchwork of horror. Pale string-like tendons hung loosely and disgustingly from the corpse, thrashing wildly and sickeningly as it closed in on me. From its exposed rib cage, its open chest cavity revealed pulsing viscera, moving with each of its lurching steps. Its skull was missing a jagged, brutal piece from the right side, a gaping wound, and from its left temple, a bone, sharp and pointed, protruded like a deformed horn, a horn that somehow, inexplicably, looked like it belonged. Its jaw and teeth looked perfectly intact, but from them a thick, black, putrid liquid oozed and dripped continuously to the ground as it walked, leaving a glistening, vile trail. As it approached, now mere feet away, I frantically looked around for something, anything to grab, somewhere, anywhere to go. My feet paced back and forth within the confines of my chalk circle, wanting nothing more than to run, but I kept myself rigidly from leaving its precarious safety. It stopped dead, in front of the chalk circle, only feet away from me, its empty, cavernous eye sockets seeming to bore directly into my very soul. I had to instantly catch my balance as I nearly fell back and out of the chalk circle, dropping the flashlight from my shaking, numb hands in the process. Again, everything fell silent, an oppressive hush, as the jagged skeletal bones from the feet of whatever this horrifying creature was stood menacingly on the very edge of my fragile circle. I didn't, for a single second, believe that a little chalk was going to keep it out, and I knew with horrifying certainty that my chances were slim. That's when I felt a strong, sudden gust of wind swooping down violently from directly above me, and I heard a loud, resounding crash. My flashlight, lying on the ground, illuminated what was beyond the monstrosity. It was enough for me to clearly see the 4 medical mannequins, now standing upright, their blank faces unsettling, surrounding the grotesque skeletal corpse which now lay crumpled on the ground. Remembering Silas's letter once more, I pulled it out with trembling fingers and reread the 6th rule: turn away or close your eyes. Do not give any indication that you know it has moved. And so, with a desperate surge of will, I immediately did. I closed my eyes tightly, forcing myself to comply. I heard the sickening sound of plastic cracking and snapping, and what sounded like heavy, blunt objects pounding relentlessly into the ground. With a shockwave I could physically feel beneath my very feet. I heard what sounded disturbingly like tearing fabric and liquid splattering onto the floor like water from a sprinkler. I only cautiously looked back when the horrifying sounds abruptly stopped. One mannequin remained, its blank, unsettling face facing away from me, its arms holding a pile of unrecognizable organic matter, the deformed, detached skull neatly placed on top, a macabre trophy. I looked to the corners of the other wards, my eyes wide with disbelief, to see that the other 3 mannequins had miraculously made their way back to their original positions. I turned away from the remaining silent mannequin, picked up my trembling flashlight, and after a long moment of hesitation, I took a cautious step outside of the chalk circle, feeling incredibly vulnerable. I was still deeply shaken by the quick, horrifying sequence of events that had just unfolded, but I decided, with a flicker of desperate hope, that the mannequins weren't here to hurt me, or at least I would be fine if I simply stayed out of their mysterious way. I let out a deep, shuddering breath and felt a fraction of the immense tension finally leave me as I slowly, cautiously walked back toward the relative safety of the cabin. I was halfway there, walking past the infirmary, when the hair on the back of my neck suddenly stood up, a chilling premonition, tensing my entire body. I knew with an absolute certainty that something was profoundly wrong. Somehow, inexplicably, I knew someone was standing directly behind me. My intuition was immediately, horrifyingly confirmed by a chilling, ragged gasp that broke the oppressive silence, a dry, desperate sound, a dry, rasping voice, filled with ancient suffering, whispered between wheezes, its words cutting through the air. "You shouldn't have left your little circle." I slowly, agonizingly turned around, my heart a hammer in my chest, and shone my light directly on the towering, impossibly skeletal man standing in the darkest part of the hallway. His thin, scrunched shoulders came up to his impossibly skinny head and bounced up and down erratically as he choked out another ragged breath, something he couldn't seem to control. He looked terrifyingly to be alive, yet more diseased, more decayed than I imagined anyone could possibly look. His body was deathly skinny, a mere collection of bones, and seemed almost folded in on itself. I couldn't see more than his arms and head, as he wore an old, faded patient gown, tattered and stained. His nails were long and dirty, much like his hands. His green-tinted, feverish eyes bulged unnaturally from his pale, gaunt head that hung forward, his neck unnaturally elongated. "You better rune," the man said in a playful, almost sing-song manner, a chilling, childlike quality in his voice, but with a sadistic and sinister undertone that sent shivers down my spine. Then, ominously, he added, 10. I stood utterly confused, frozen in place. 9. My heart sank like a stone in my chest when I realized, with sudden clarity, that he was counting down. 8. My frantic thoughts immediately raced to where Silas had described the location of room 404. I figured that this skeletal apparition must be who Silas referred to. Without another second's hesitation, I booked it, sprinting with every ounce of strength I possessed, for the southwest corner of the asylum, where the second floor could be accessed. 7. I had never run so hard, so desperately, in my entire life, my uniform rustling loudly with each frantic stride. 6. He began to shout the numbers louder, his voice echoing eerily through the silent, decaying halls, amplifying my terror. I spotted what looked to be the open doorway described in the letter, a single, faded digit, 404, faintly visible above it, a beacon of desperate hope. But before I could tell for sure, I tripped violently on a loose floorboard. My knee connected with it head-on, and I was sent tumbling, sprawling helplessly to the ground, my flashlight skittering uselessly away into the darkness. 5. I frantically glanced up at the open doorway I was now laying directly in front of. It was unmistakably, indeed, room 404. This was it. 4. I scrambled for the small sealed vial in my uniform jacket pocket. 3. I pulled it out quickly, my trembling fingers fumbling with the stubborn seal. 2. I retrieved one hand and lifted it towards my face, preparing to activate it. 1. I snapped the seal and inverted the vial, preparing to pour the clear liquid, my only hope. "Here I come," the skeletal man roared, his voice a triumphant, blood-curdling shriek. Mistakenly, I looked back, just for a fraction of a second, to see the skeletal man's impossibly long, gangly legs, carrying him at a diabolically fast pace, directly in my direction. He'd be on me, consuming me, in less than a second. I snapped my head back to the vial, and kept trying desperately to pour it out. A strong, sudden thud hit the ground right next to me. I flinched violently and rolled over, once again facing the broad, unyielding back of a medical mannequin. All four of them had come down from their perches and miraculously placed themselves between me and the skeletal man. The two in the middle held him firmly in place as he thrashed wildly, screaming and attempting to desperately grab me. I seized the precious opportunity and poured the entire liquid onto the floor, a desperate prayer. "No!" the skeletal man muttered in fear, his voice suddenly weak, thin. "No, no, no, stop!" he commanded, his voice growing frantic, before breaking down into nothing but incoherent screaming and gurgling. Ignoring him completely, I emptied the remaining contents of the vial onto the floor directly in front of room 404. I fell back, collapsing, as a pale, milky mist ignited violently from the liquid, swirling and rising around the doorway, obscuring everything. He fell silent, his screams abruptly cut off. When I cautiously looked back, the mannequins were gone, vanished without a trace, and all that remained was the skeletal man, standing utterly lifeless, his head hanging in defeat, the faint wisps of mist still clinging to his tattered gown. Getting slowly back to my feet, I looked away from him and walked towards the main gate. I was tempted to look back, and when I did, he was gone. I gathered my backpack from the cabin and sat with my back pressed firmly against the main gates until the sun finally rose. The first welcome rays of dawn painted the sky in gentle hues of orange and pink, making the old asylum look almost peaceful, almost inviting. When it did, I quickly unlocked the main gate and returned my entire set of keys to the drawer in the cabin. I walked out of that gate, down the street, and finally home. I didn't sleep when I got there. I don't think I slept for days, no matter how hard I tried. Over time, it got better. I still see Silas at the asylum gates when I pass, from time to time quietly maintaining the grounds. I know he recognizes me. He smiles when he sees me, a faint knowing curve of his lips. I haven't spoken to him since that day. I don't know what I would say if I did. I haven't said a single word about this to any of my roommates or friends. I don't know how to possibly bring it up. I don't know who, in their right mind, would ever believe me. But sometimes, when I'm utterly alone in my bedroom, in the profound darkness, the faint chilling sound of creaking floorboards or a distant dry gasp wakes me abruptly from my fitful sleep, sending cold dread through my veins. And sometimes, when I'm drifting off, hovering on the edge of unconsciousness, I'm sharply interrupted by a chilling countdown, a spectral whisper. 10, 9, 8, 7.